Good morning, guys. I'm Jamie, and I'm a grateful recovered addict today. And with God's guidance and under Jesus' name, without Him, I'm nothing. So before I come into, as I come into recovery, I was a mess, a complete mess. And once I found God back in my, once I got God in my life, things changed for me dramatically. My life got a lot better. But you know what? Like I'm literally, I think I'm 163 days clean and sober today. But my story's had relapse in it. And the thing is, if I don't stick to that triangle of recovery, through the AA, CA, the 12 steps, then I'll go back out the door, without doing service, helping others, speaking to newcomers, sponsoring, doing all the things I need to do to keep myself clean. Helping others keeps me clean. Having God in my life keeps me clean. But I'm going to talk about, how I come into these rooms, what it was like, how I found the rooms, how I found God, and what it's like what it's like today. My story started off at a very young age. My first memory was my dad. My dad was a heroin addict. I never knew my dad that well, but my first memory of him was beating my mum up. I could hear my mum bounce off the walls downstairs. I was very young, 3 or 4 years old. But it's a memory. I've got a really deep memory of it. Did that make me an addict? I don't know. It's part of my story. I know it's part of my story. My mum moved me away. She moved me away. I lived in Winchester, and she moved away from all her family to get me away from drugs and to get me away from that lifestyle. My dad went in prison for attempted murder. He was a bit of a nutcase. My mum moved me away to get me away from that life. But you know what? I still end up being an addict. And she done all that for me, and I still end up being an addict. The age of 15, 16 in school, I always got bullied. I was bullied. I was always in fear. I was never comfortable with myself. I was never a popular kid. I was always sat at the back of the room, always too scared to talk. I went to church with my mum. My mum took me to church. I got baptized, but I never done it for me. I don't think I really believed in God. I'd done it to fit in with the family and felt like I had to do it. So I'd done this, and I was still being, that naughty kid, trying to watch my language as well. Sorry, but I was always that naughty kid still, like stealing, doing things and that. So I know I never really had God in my life, But I started smoking weed at the age of 15. I started smoking fags. But weed, I got bored of very quickly. I done it to fit in my friends. I didn't really drink a lot. Sometimes I spend the Friday night outside the shops with my friends. 6 cans of Stella or whatever. And I misbehaved quite a bit. But do you know what? Things started, when I started taking the harder drugs, when I got to 17, 18, I started doing amphetamines and things like that. And I done this to fit in. I done it give me confidence, give me I actually come out myself and started having confidence talking to people, talking to girls, you know. But do you know what? That was more of a weekend thing. It was more social, it was a Friday, Saturday, sometimes a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But I took on a family at the age of 18. I took on 3 children, and I got the missus who was 7 years older than me, and I was with the woman for 19 years, but we were both we were both addicts, and the 3 stepchildren I took on, I loved them dearly. They called me dad, but they see things kids shouldn't see. I was going to raves, I was doing pills, I was doing LSD, things like that. But I was coming back at the breakfast table. They were getting up in the morning and they were seeing stuff I shouldn't see. Didn't see me using drugs, but they see us, all out of our trees, up all night, talking rubbish to each other, and they're still up in the morning. They're up in the morning. I'm still at the table. But I had my youngest, I had my oldest daughter, because obviously I've got 2 children of my own as well for the same lady. I had my oldest daughter, and I thought that'd be a reason for me to stop, but I couldn't stop. I still could not stop. I was powerless. Even on the wet the baby's head, I still went out and used that night. I wasn't in the hospital. I was in the hospital when she was born, but I left quite quickly to go and use. But things got really bad for me towards the end of the relationship. I got to 19 years with her. We had my youngest daughter was on the way. She was 9 months pregnant, my missus at the time. Apparently, I'd give up drugs for 3 months. I don't remember it, and as you'll understand when I tell you my story. But yeah, I went out on a stag do. I was best man, and I got attacked on the way home, and I was put in a coma. And I was, my partner at the time reckons I was 3 months clean. I'd give up for my last child. But I don't remember none of it. But yeah, I got 5 metal plates to my face. I was attacked and left for dead. I had police by my side, thinking that, it was going to be a attempted murder charge. And do you know what? I was in hospital for nearly 3 or 4 months. It destroyed me. But when I come out, things got really bad because I lost confidence. I become a shell of myself. and cocaine come into the equation, and I started using really badly with cocaine. It gave me confidence, but I wouldn't leave the house. I was spending all the money on it, I was spending it, but the lying could become I started lying. I was manipulating. My children lost their father. Even my stepkids I love dearly. I started pushing them about, not pushing them about, but moods. A lot of mood swings, come downs. And I was a shell of myself, really was a shell of myself. We ended up splitting up, my partner. She was the love of my life. I was with her 19 years, and I really did love the woman, but drugs took over. Like I said, I was stealing, I was taking money out of my kids' birthday cards, Christmas. They did get for me. Don't get me wrong, I was buying them trainers, I bought stuff and that, but I wasn't there emotionally. But towards the end of my habit, I was running out of money quickly and I was trying to find money to buy it because I was powerless. But yeah, and I ended up having to move out. I lost my family, and yeah, I moved into a house share, and I was there for nearly 3 years. But in that time, I was having my children over. My daughter was only, I think, my youngest daughter at the time was 6 years old. And I was racking up lines of cocaine on a CD case before she come because I knew I couldn't go without it. And I was leaving her under the bed, but I was always going down, doing her nose when she weren't looking, and giving her a phone, giving her a TV remote, giving her biscuits, giving her money, thinking that I was being a good dad. Now I know, away from, having a program, having God in my life, I wasn't. I was doing it for being selfish reasons. So yeah, that went on for. And it's another thing as well. I always found with me, I always had to be in a relationship. I always had to feel like I was needed. I had to belong somewhere. And I ended up living in this house share for 3 years, and I left it 3 years, and I started to go onto a dating website to try and find another lady. And it didn't take me long. It was 3 months later, and I'm seeing someone else. And once again, I started pushing my kids away. My kids, had a dad who was an addict, and then I started pushing them away again because I got with a lady. She was in recovery. She was in AA. I moved out of my home quite quickly, and I moved in with her. But I was going to meetings with her, and AA meetings in Chelmsford. And that's where I moved to. And at the time, I wasn't going for me. I told her I'd give up the drugs, but I hadn't. I think I'd give up for 2 months, but I made out I'd give up for a year. She was 9 years clean. We were seeing each other. I was with the lady for 3 years in the end, but I was seeing her, but I was going to meetings every week with her. So I heard the word God thing quite a lot, and she used to do her prayers and all that, but I still weren't accepting it for me. As far as I was concerned, I was going to these meetings for her, but it kept me clean for these 2 years. But I was still drinking alcohol, but I wasn't using cocaine no more. I went to my dad's funeral, who I was talking about at the beginning, who was near heaven. My sister went down to Winchester, who was dying, and she was going down to see me. I wasn't going to let her go on her own, knowing what background he had. So I went with her. When my dad died, he died. We've done the funeral. I come back to Chelmsford, and I woke up the next morning with my partner on top of me. She was drunk. I've been with her 3 years, just under 3 years. We are going to get married and everything. She'd been using for 3 or 4 months. So I didn't even notice. I did not know. She was doing work conferences like every year. She'd do a work conference. She worked from home, and she was going to these work conferences for a week at a time, drinking. I didn't even notice. That destroyed us. And she started using cocaine, and I didn't touch it for 3 or 4 months. But it did not take long for me to start using again. One day I thought, if I can't beat them, I'll join them. So I started using cocaine again. And do you know what? Within the first couple of noses, I went back to the old me very quickly. I was lying, I was manipulating, I was stealing. She was treating me really bad because she was an alcoholic. I didn't understand what an alcoholic was, but she was really bad, abusive. She was lying to her children. She accused me of rape. She rang the police on me. Obviously, it all got dropped because it was rubbish. She eventually admitted it to her children. But you know what? I kept going back. I kept going back to her because I didn't want to lose, another relationship. Didn't want to lose, I pushed all my children away, so I had no one in my life, and I was scared of being on my own again. So I kept going back to this woman. This went on for another 3 or 4 months, and I kept going back, My children stopped, my children hated her. She was abusing my children drunk. She was on the phone abusing them. She abused my mum, but I still kept going back. I still wanted back the old woman I fell in love with, and that wasn't going to happen. Eventually, I walked away. I grew some and walked away, basically. And when I was on the way back to Colchester, when I left her. I think it was about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was driving under the influence, and I was driving through back to Colston. My mum lives in a place called Mersey. It's like a little island off Colston. I don't know if anyone knows it. Yeah. But anyway, I was driving through there and the police were going past me. I could hear the police in the background. Well, you can imagine I was paranoid on drugs, thinking it was all about me again. So I pulled over, let them go past me. There was ambulances, fire engines. Didn't think nothing of it. I went back to my mum's. I woke up the next morning. I had a phone call from my ex-partner. Christ, gets me every time. I had a phone call from my ex-partner, and the kid's mum, to say my son had drowned in a riptide. That's what the police were there for. He drowned in a riptide. He was 28 years old. He was my stepson. He called me dad. I brought him up for 19 years, saving his son. That boy drowned, saving his son. Sorry. Yeah, drowned, saving his son. Do you know what? He kept his son out of that water, and he drowned under the water by the time the rescue got to him. So he died a legend. Do you know, I envied that boy. He was a better dad than I ever was, But it destroyed me. It sent me into the darkest place. My cocaine use just got out of control. I tried taking my life. I was going to leave my kids without a dad, as well as their big brother, as if they weren't going through enough, And I destroyed them. I destroyed them again. I made it all about me because I didn't realise at the time I was an addict, or I didn't want to believe it. I didn't think I had a problem, but I was starting to realise I had a problem, Admitting it was a different thing. Like I said, I always felt like I had to belong, so I chased another relationship. I got another lady called Gemma, and she was clean. She'd never done drugs before. She never drunk. She never done anything. I told her I'd give up drugs again. I lied. I manipulated. We got into a relationship. She was absolutely brilliant with me. She was such a good woman. She didn't deserve it, but I was lying to her again. She found cocaine on me. And you know what? She had a son who was autistic, and I was bringing her son up. And, he was very, very shy. He was only young. We used to have to take him to school naked and things like that because he was scared to go to school. He was very, in on himself. But he let me in. He let me in, not as a father, but someone close to him, and that took a long time. So I broke this boy's heart. And you know what? He begged his mum to take me back. And she did. She took me back again. And once again, I lied and manipulated again. Told her I'd give up. I'd give up for a month. But I was using again behind her back. She took me to Marrakesh. She bought me a van. She was buying me clothes. And basically, I was using her. I didn't know at the time because I thought I loved her. I did love her. But I was manipulating again. I was powerless again. And you know what? This went on for another couple of months. She found cocaine on me again. And it ended. And you know what I've done again? Tried taking my life again because I made it all about me. Feel sorry for me. Even though I destroyed that woman's life, destroyed her kid's life, and a second family I destroyed, I made it all about me. Sorry. Yeah, made it all about me. And yeah, I've lost where I am now. Made it all about me. But you know what? I tried to take my life again. But this is when I first come into the fellowship. I didn't come into CA. I went into another fellowship called NA. But once again, I didn't do it for me. I done it to try and keep her. She'd already left me, but I was trying to win her back. I got 16 days. I still hadn't accepted God into my life then, but I got 16 days and I relapsed. Why did I relapse? Because I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for someone else. I know that now. Do you know what? That was the strongest point for me, though, because this is what brought me into CA, and that's when things started to change for me. I got myself a big book, got myself a sponsor. Sorry, I went into CA, and everyone on there was so friendly. I had people reaching out to me very quickly, ringing me up. The fellowship was quite big. I was seeing all these smiley faces. They were talking about God, and it scared me. I'm not gonna lie, it really scared me at first. But I knew I was powerless, and I couldn't run the show no more. Running the show wasn't working for me, and I had to hand it over to a higher power. And I would have done anything. I would have done anything to get myself clean at that time. I had someone ring me up on the first time I was in these rooms and become my sponsor. And it was the best decision I've made, And, straight away on that step one, realising I was powerless, Step two, accepting that I needed that higher power. And that's step three, accepting God into my life. And at that time, it wasn't God for me. It was a higher power. But whatever it was working for me. I started ringing all these newcomers. I was doing stuff. I was doing prayers. I was doing meditation. I was on my knees. I could pray to a tree and I'd been grateful at the time, you know, because it was working for me. It really was. And he started to take me through the steps, you know, took me through step 4, and that's when I started to grow a little bit on that. Started doing my resentments to, you know, having resentments from people, which I now realise that I was the cause of half of them. You know, all these resentments I had to others, I caused them. You know, them resentments are there because I made them happen, you know. Not all of them, don't get me wrong. And the harms I caused to others, the harms I caused to others made me grow. You know, I realised how much of a wrong I'd been, how selfish and self-centred I'd been all the way through. My step 4 was massive, you know. And obviously I went through, you know, hand my burden over to God, you know, Jesus. I had to do something, and I did. But do you know what? It's when I got to my step 8 that I started to feel God. On my step 8, I've done my letters from my son to me, and I've done a thing called the Richmond line. I don't know if anyone knows it on here, but I've done the Richmond line. It's very quite strict, but I needed that. I needed to have like some barriers, you know, and I've done my letters from my son to me, and it was a powerful one, you know, writing to me because he never got to see me clean before he died, you know, and it's just, sorry, but he never got to see me clean, you know. And I've written his letter from him to me, and do you know what? It was so easy writing down what I'd done wrong, but it wasn't so easy reading it back, you know, and doing my letter from me to him. On my step 9, doing my amends, that was a powerful one for me. That's when God came into my life. I started to have a spiritual awakening. I went to the grave and I'd done my amends there. I couldn't find his grave. I couldn't find his grave anywhere there. So I prayed. I rung up one of my other fellows in CA. He's called Owen. He's a good friend of mine. He'd been into fellowship. We had a science sponsor, and I said to him, "I can't find the grave." I was crying because it's at the plot where my partner, I was with the children's mother. I was with for 19 years. Her mum and dad died of cancer. They were there, and the plaque was there. You know, because he was buried in Hertfordshire, so there was a plaque in Colchester. You know, but I couldn't find it. He said to me, "Pray to God." So I prayed. For the first time I prayed and begged God, begged Jesus, please let me find his grave. I walked on his grave within about a minute of looking, and I found it. You know, in the middle of all these graves, I could not find it. And that's when I realised, that's when I started to have this feeling for God. Started to feel Jesus in my life. I prayed hard, and do you know what? I sat there and I done my amends with my son. It was beautiful. You know, don't get me wrong, I cried my eyes out a bit I am now. But you know what? It was a beautiful feeling. I've got rid of the burden I've been dying to get rid of, you know. And I also done the amends with her mum and dad. You know, I've never done that before. You know, her mum and dad, they were alive while I was with her. You know, they passed while, you know, her mum died while I was with her, and her dad passed as we split up. You know, but I knew if I didn't just hurt, I didn't hurt Nikki and the kids. I hurt the family, the whole family. You know, it's a ripple effect. I hurt a lot of people. So I've done amends to her mum and dad as well. It was beautiful. You know, I come away from there feeling so good. But you know what? I went through to my step 12, yeah, and I got through my step 12. But I come a recovery thief. I didn't help others. You know, I was helping others by talking to them on the phone, but I didn't sponsor anyone. You know, and it was my downfall because I got my job back. I wasn't listening to my sponsor. I stopped praying. I stopped meditating, and I ended up relapsing. I went out there for 14 weeks. And you know, why did I stop? Because I stopped praying, I stopped meditating, I stopped using God as my tool, you know, and I relapsed very quickly, you know. But I relapsed. So in the end, my daughter was dying of cancer. I found out my daughter was dying of cancer. That's one of the reasons I relapsed. It wasn't the only reason, it was just part of that as well. My daughter passed away. Yes, I've lost my son, I've lost my daughter, my kids have lost their big sister as well, you know. And I had to make a change. I was in the bedroom again using, and when she was alive, I was trying to do amends with her because I was a liability of all the stuff I'd done to my younger children. She didn't want to talk to me while she was alive. I couldn't do an amends with her. But when she died, I was using again in the bedroom, in the same place that she remembered me being in, doing, you know. I was destroyed. So that's when I had to make a big change. I come out of hospital. I was in hospital about 10 days. I was collapsed. And I rang my fellow up who's in a dry house in Preston. He's called Owen. He's my best friend in recovery, you know, and I begged him to get me to this dry house. Right, I left all my family behind. Obviously, half my family weren't talking to me anyway, and I moved away. You know, I was scared. I was in fear, but I knew I had to make that change. I couldn't run the show more. I wasn't running the show more. I was destroying myself. So I moved to Preston to a dry house. I'm 162 days clean and sober today. You know, do you know what? My daughter's funeral come up, right? My daughter's funeral come up, and I was a mess. I wasn't allowed to the funeral, right? And Owen in the other house, who got me there, took me to church for the first time I've been to church since I was 15, 16. He took me to church. And do you know what? I walked in, and you had the songs playing this morning. I'll give you. Jasmine was playing this morning, and one of them was Holy. And Holy come on. And I burst straight into tears. I felt Jesus. I felt Jesus. I felt God for the first time. You know, I said to you, I felt him when I done my amends, but I actually felt him. It touched my heart. You know, since then, right, I went to church. I went up and done a big prayer for Danielle, and you know, I don't know who it was, but it's like an elder in there, I don't know, but he touched my heart and he made me feel like I got something off my chest. I come away from there, right, and I've been back to church every week since. I've now been baptized. You know, I've got God in my life. I help others. I've been through the 12 steps again. You know, and I've now got sponsees. I've took them through the steps. You know, life's beautiful today. You know, the power of Jesus, power of God. You know, I love things now. I'm at the church. I volunteer. I help the homeless. I do the food banks. You know, I talk to all the. I go in my CA jumper. You know, I sit down. I talk to people about drugs if they want me to. If not, I'll just sit there and I'll talk about Jesus with them. You know, just tell them there's a better life out there. You know, because doing God's work definitely gives back to you, right? Since I've been going to church and I've done my steps and that all over again. I've done the Cameron F way this time. I don't know if anyone knows it, but I went a different way. I went through it a different way this time. I got a different sponsor, you know, and you know, my life's beautiful today. I've been back to Colchester recently, yeah, and I've been back there. One of my oldest daughter still hasn't talked to me after 5 years. Obviously, I've lost 2 stepchildren. I've got a son as well who's not talking to me, you know, but my youngest daughter started talking to me again, you know, and that's the grace of God, you know. She sees how well I'm doing now. She can see the change in me, you know, and you know, it's beautiful. I went back to the Colchester a couple of weeks ago. I was on the beach with her where my son died, you know, and we let off balloons on his birthday on the beach where he died, which is in Mersey as well. And you know what? I've done my amends for my daughter, and then I sat there and I've done a prayer for both of us to David, you know. And for the first time in my life, I was present for my daughter. You know, I was present for my daughter, and it's such an amazing feeling. I went to the graveyard to try and do an amends for my daughter. I couldn't find her grave. I once again prayed to God. For some reason, he wasn't giving me the answer. I couldn't find her grave. Right. Later on that day, I spoke to my daughter because it was my son's birthday, and obviously everyone was going up to the grave from the family. I now know God was stopping me finding this grave because I was going to cause more harms to others because I would have gone mental if I was there. She wasn't talking to me. Her real dad was there. You know, that it could have caused a big argument. You know, so now I know God was holding me back. You know, I didn't know that at the time. In 2 or 3 weeks' time, I've booked it again. I'm going back to Colchester again. I've now met a partner as well. I've met another Christian who I'm in relationship. We've been seeing each other 9, 10 weeks. You know, they say pray together, we stay together. You know, she's beautiful. I've got a Christian in my life. You know, and for the first time in my life, I haven't chased a relationship. It's come to me. And if that isn't God doing His work, then what is it? You know, God's everything to me now. He really is. You know, I'm just feeling Jesus when I go to God. You know, when I go to church now, you know, I've got my arms. I worship. Life's just so much better now. You know, I don't know how you do it on here, but you know, normally when I'm in the CA meetings, you know, I spread the message to the newcomer. You know, there's a beautiful life out there if we work this program. You know, if we work it and we give back to God, God gives back to you. You know, anyway, guys, I don't know how long I've been talking, but I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Beautiful, Jamie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jamie. Very, 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 very interesting. Very good. Very, very. Yeah. Sorry, brother, but wow, really moving. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you for sharing your testimony.